Welcome. My name is Vladimir Propp. Today we will be discussing narratology and how this form of criticism helps one better understand literature. By using three forms of narratology created by Aristotle, Gerard Genette, and myself, we will decipher the story Heat by Joyce Carol Oates.
Okay, so what exactly is narratology?
Narratology is the study of how narratives make meaning and the understanding of basic mechanisms and procedures which are common to all acts of storytelling. Narratology is not the interpretation of individual stories, but the attempt to study the nature of story itself as a concept and as a cultural practice.
Okay, so I understand that, but the story Heat is very different than a typical folktale with a princess and a hero. So how could we possibly decipher that story using narratology?
Although the story may not fit all categories or elements of a typical folk tale, there are similar aspects to all storytelling. Aristotle developed three kinds of elements of plot found in stories of all kinds. These three elements are hamartia, anagnorisis, and peripeteia.
So what exactly does each of these three elements entail?
Hamartia means a sin or a fault. This is often a flaw in a character that leads to their demise. Anagnorisis means recognition or realization. This is the moment that the protagonist realizes the truth of a situation. Lastly, peripeteia means a turnaround or reversal. This could be a fall from great fortune to poverty or the fall of a hero from greatness.
So the hamartia of the story Heat would be the twins' desire for power, the drive to develop their strength by stealing money from their grandmother and bully those around them.
Then the anagnorisis would be when the two girls force the narrator to strip under the porch, confirming their power over others, correct?
This is all true. So if we follow this pattern of enlightenment, the peripeteia would be when Roger separates the twins and dominates over their power.
So that all makes sense. But then, where are the princesses and heroes?
These roles can be found in Oates' story, but the characters who embody these roles are to be interpreted by the reader. For example, the twins can be viewed as the princesses, the sought-after person pursued by the villain. The princess is only one of my 7 spheres of action used in the story. Can you think of any others?
Well, couldn't the twins also be their own hero?
Possibly. Why do you think they are heroes?
Well, because once Rhonda, when separated, tried to save Rhea, Rhonda would be a hero, considering that the story portrays them to be one entity. Therefore, they would be both heroes.
But then wouldn't the twins also be their own villains, since they are the ones who continually harass and belittle those around them, creating double trouble?
That would be considered more of a sin or a fault of a hero, as discussed earlier.
So is Roger the villain then? Or he is the helper who protected the community from the wrath of the twins?
The role of the villain is open to the interpretation of the reader. It can even be said that the twins whom enter the story as replacements for Rhea and Rhonda could be perceived as false heroes, since they can never truly replace the original heroes.
So we now know the 3 key plot elements of the story and the character spheres. I guess that sums up narratology, right?
Not quite. Gerard Genette created 5 basic points for the process of telling stories. We have not yet used these to examine Oates' story. We must look at the narrative and decide if it is a mimetic or a diegetic. Mimetic is slow telling and dramatic, while diegetic means telling or relating, a contrast to mimetic by being more rapid or panoramic.
Okay, so with that, then that means Heat is diegetic, since the narrator jumps through time at a rapid pace so that the reader can better relate to the story.
Correct. The aim of the style of narrative is to give essentially or linked information effectively without creating the illusion that the events are happening before the reader's eyes. Instead, the narrator says what's happening without trying to show it as it happens. The next element of storytelling is how the narrative is vocalized, meaning the perspective from which the story is told.
I remember some of the elements from an English class I took in my youth. Wouldn't the focalization be external in this story, since the story is told from the narrator's perspective, which is outside the characters actually depicted on the story?
Very good. That is correct. Since we are on a roll, who is telling the story?
The narrator.
Yes, but is the speaker a non-intrusive narrator, representing a voice similar to the author speaking directly to the reader? An intrusive narrator, a named character who has witnessed or participated in the events being recalled, or a heterodiegetic narrator, an outsider who tells the story of the main characters?
Well, that's easy. It's clear that the narrator of the story should be heterodiegetic, since she is not a named character in the story, and speaks from the view of an outsider telling the story to someone else.
The fourth element is how time is handled in the story. This would mean, does the story consist of flash forwards or flashbacks?
Well, the story at hand is a continually graduating flashback, starting when the narrator is young and working its way back to present time, but it never quite makes it out of the flashback.
So then how is the story packaged? Is it a primary narrative, which is individual stories, a meta-narrative, which are stories within stories, double-ended narratives, which come back to the story within the story at the end of the narrative, or intrusive, which interrupts the story for the reader?
The story is double-ended, since the tale ends with the narrator's opinion about the story within the story itself.
Yes, double-ended appears to be the best fit, since when the tale concludes with the reader being briefly returned to the main plot of the story. Then lastly, we examine how speech and thought are represented in the tale. To determine this, we must pay close attention to the points in the tale when the character speaks outside the voice of the narrator. There are different forms, such as direct, tagged, and reporter.
In the last paragraph of the narrative, there is an argument between Rhonda and Rhea. And Rhonda says, she'd gone home, he said. And Rhoda said right away that Rhea wouldn't go home without her. It sounds as if the presence of the narrator is still strong within the lines of the text.
It should, since the style is that of a reported form. The reader is not given the actual spoken words with the character's voice. Instead, the narrator continues to speak, but tags the conversation as to provide the reader with a more realistic feel of the conversation being described. With that being said, I must draw this discussion to a close. We were able to cover both Aristotle's and Jeanette's critical view as well as my own. Narratology is the study of how all texts share a common form of storytelling. Thank you for joining us.